Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. If there's one thing you don't want to do in any romantic relationship, it's get too competitive about which of the partners is smarter, whether you're gay, straight, anything in between. You don't want to go into that. That is the drama at the core of today's episode. Standard Deviation, fourth episode of the first season, and one of my favorite of the season, just like the previous episode. If you were to compare them, if I were to do a top 10, I Wish I Were Gus would be towards the bottom of the 10, whereas Standard Deviation would be towards the top. I'm not certain if it would be number one, but it'd be in the running. That's how good I think this episode is. Of the early episodes of this season, it is the big gem out of all of them, and it's definitely where the show really starts to pick up some steam. Now, what I mean by that is, while the first three episodes have funny moments, and you do get a lot of interesting character interactions, they mainly set up the dynamic of the show the relationship between the characters, and you get the initial dramas. I mean, this drama could have happened earlier in these characters' lives, but given the nature of sitcoms, especially in the pilot episode, it's set up the way it is to give the audience their initial peek behind the curtain and into the world of these characters. By this point in the show, 4 episodes in, you don't have to set it up like that anymore. And this is where the show starts to show these characters, it's just another day in the life. You don't have to spend time doing exposition for setup on stuff unless it's introducing a new character or a new setup to add to what's already been shown. With here, it mainly uses what's already been shown in the show. The characters, their interactions, their jobs, and of course basic relationships that anyone can understand, like I've already mentioned, husband and wife. And I don't really bring up the writers that much in this, but this episode was written by Steve Skrovan, who you might hear that name a couple times further down the road because he wrote a lot of episodes of this series. I mean, there's a couple hundred episodes of the series, give or take. He wrote about 35 of them, paced out throughout all the seasons. I mean, he even wrote the finale of the entire show. He wrote a couple of my favorite episodes placed throughout the show. He wrote Halloween Candy, Civil War, All I Want for Christmas, and of course, one of my favorite episodes from the first season I watched live, Home from School, hashtag PP Raymond. The plot of the episode, as I've hinted a couple times already, involves which spouse is smarter. And the way that is brought up is that one day, Ray and Debra are relaxing at home. Ray's trying to get out of doing some bill work, mainly insurance bills, matching the insurance to which medical bill it has to go with. He doesn't want to do it. In his typical Ray way, he's like, hey, it could be a 5, it could be a 6, it's going to have to wait till tomorrow. Then he offers to rub Deborah's feet to get out of hearing her complaining, which is such a Ray move. Even this early on in the show is established this is something he'll do. And then who walks in but Robert, and he's like, glad you're not busy. And of course this ties into him being a cop. Is like, how'd you know we weren't busy? Well, I looked through the window. As he puts it off as part of his training. This early on, it kind of seems a little creepy that he would do that. I mean, later on in the show, Robert wouldn't do that, or at least wouldn't openly admit he'd do it. But I feel that at least for the Robert character, they're still trying to figure out how far exactly he goes in certain regards for his job, for his resentment and jealousy of his brother. So I'm glad it's one of the character traits that they drop and then accentuate his jealousy in other ways. So by season 3, they'll get that part of his character down a lot better. But here he mentions that he needs to give an IQ test to both of them because he's taking a criminology class to make lieutenant, which is an aside. He does not make lieutenant until season 5, season 6, if I remember right. And I'm just glad to say that plot point actually does pay off, but it makes me wonder, why does it take him that long to get promoted to it? I know when he does get promoted, he mentions that he has to wait for someone to retire before his promotion goes through, but did he just have to take that many classes in order to take the test, or did he have to procrastinate to take the test? Because I imagine in season 4, when the bull incident happens, he's probably not going to be taking the test then. With how his police record is, you would imagine him being one of the first officers they'd want to take the lieutenant test and definitely promote upon passing. So it's probably a plot element they overlooked. But that's just me trying to think of a logical reason for why that is there, but that's just how my mind is whenever plot elements like that pop up and then they pop again later, and I'm like, why didn't that pop up sooner? Well, he gives them it. We don't see him administer the test to Debra, but we do see him administer at least part of the test to Ray. And I've never taken an IQ test, but even watching some of this is like, how does this have to do with testing your IQ? Which is a good little bit of foreshadowing for what we see later. It seems more like a test that you do for a standardized test with the questions we see. You know, who invented the cotton gin? And then Ray gets the wrong Eli. He says Eli Wallach, the actor, and when he meant Eli Whitney, and he tries to correct it in his own Ray way. The next part of the test, though, I can kind of see it's to try to recreate this two-dimensional image using these blocks in 10 seconds. And of course, Ray is complaining about it, as he would. He's like, hey, that's an image, I can't do it. And then get a little bit of physical comedy where he grabs all the blocks, then Ray has the big one, and it's a little thing where it's like... And then even though he only has one grip on it, Robert is still able to pull Ray in the chair over to him, take the block, put it to his chin, and put it away. Now, before we get the results of the IQ test, who'd walk in but Frank and Marie? They wanted to take the test, or should I say at least Marie wanted to take the test, but she's not going to be able to right now because Frank doesn't want to, because he doesn't believe in IQ tests, because as he puts it, he doesn't want his brain measured. It's gotten him this far, and those type of tests only go with book smarts. They don't measure street smarts. Which to a point I can understand. I mean, I personally don't like IQ tests either, because I figure that just because you have a high IQ does not mean you're going to be able to act in a good way. I mean, you could have a high IQ and still be, for lack of a better term, ignorant. Just like you could have a low IQ and still act in a very intelligent manner. It's about how you use your brain power, not how much you have, in theory. And I think that some of these people that get the high IQs, they just use it to flaunt it. That's why, personally, if I ever have kids, I wouldn't want to have the IQ test done on them, even if other people do. And I think part of it is also something that I've heard other people say about my IQ, not in a negative manner. It's just one of those things like, alright, you say that, I don't kind of see it. Well, the results come back, and Ray is 100, which Robert puts as average, which I don't know if that's accurate for these type of tests, whether now or at the time this episode was made back in 96. But it works, especially to get the character reactions. He got that from you, Frank. And of course, Debra has 115, which is, Robert puts it, is one standard deviation, which is where we get the title of the episode, which means that Debra is one brain class above Ray, which bums him out. Now, when we first hear that this bums Ray out, you're thinking, oh, he really is taking this hard, because I guess he figured that they were closer than that. But in typical Ray fashion, and this is something we'll definitely see him do later, he starts to exploit the situation to get his way. And of course it backfires eventually, because Debra catches on to what he's doing, and this leads to that one scene that we see in some of the openings where she puts the ice cream in his crotch. Fudgy, as Ray puts it. I don't know if it's just me, but in the scene when we do find out that Ray is exploiting the issue, the dialogue between Debra and Linda does come across as being implying, I should say, that one gender should be smarter than the other gender by default. Maybe that's just how it's coming off to me, and I'm reading into that, and that's not what they meant. But that's what some of the dialogue comes off as. But it could also be just coming off as them saying, just because of how Ray is, Debra by default is smarter than him, because of her being an actually intelligent, eloquent woman, and Ray's just, while he has a degree and he is smart to a point, he's not as smart. So the result is, you know, it was a given, but it being on paper is a different thing than assuming it based on observations of behaviors. It's either or. It's just one of those weird little things I noticed watching it this time. Although I will say I can definitely see from watching how the characters are written that Debra is definitely smarter than Ray. Or is he, according to the episode? Because after the next scene where Debra confronts Ray about him exploiting the situation, Robert comes back in and says that he got the scores mixed up and Ray has one standard deviation higher than Debra, which really freaks her out, and Ray is all smug about it, and as he puts it, now it's a happy marriage, because this plays into something he says during their little argument, and that is he heard that the happiest marriages are the ones where the man is smarter. And in that case, I have to agree with what Debra says, and that is, guess who wrote that? Yeah, that definitely sounds like something a misogynistic male would have written to try to exploit his position over a female if he knew she was smarter, but wanted to make it seem like he was the smarter one. And it could also just be something that Ray just pulling out of his ass to try to win the argument. Either or. I'd say it's more probably the former than the latter, because I don't know if Ray would go that far to try to win an argument by doing an ass pull. And of course, their marriage is a little rocky for a couple days, a couple more little arguments, them questioning the results, and as Ray puts it when she tries to placate him in a nice way, numbers don't lie. And their little argument about smarts leads to one of their exchanges that really makes the marital dynamics in this episode, and that is them posing different questions to one another. Deborah's going with the book intellectual questions, usually drawing from historical facts, whereas Ray's are drawing from pop culture. Like, my favorite one is, how much does Mickey Rooney weigh on the moon? That's a question that you never thought you would need to know the answer to, but I'm guessing from the fact that Ray asks that he knows it. It's some useless information, but some pertinent one depending on the context of your situation. But then Deborah throws the ultimate swerve and asks Ray whether her hair was long or short when they met. And Ray's answer, I'm guessing the whole story he gives around it when he tries to answer it the next morning, is completely wrong, which is part of the reason why it is an automatic wrong. Or it could have just been a later retcon that they decided not to use that situation, because that is definitely not how they met. They did not meet when it was raining. It was a futon delivery. Probably just Ray intentionally forgetting that, or maybe him thinking that he saw her earlier. More likely it's just them deciding to roll with a different story for how they met and not wanting to create rain. But it's worth noting here that his story involved rain and meeting Deborah. Now, I don't think her hair in that episode is quite the same as it is with how Ray describes it, but then again, Deborah says no to the situation, so he probably got the hair length wrong too. Now, if he had mentioned something about knocking a futon on her, that would have been funny. I would love to have seen her reaction, but she probably knows he remembers that. Now, as we find out in the last part of this episode, this was not about an IQ test after all. The point of the class that Robert was taking was to see how people would interact if you mess with their mind. And in this case, it's give an IQ test, or something that's supposed to be an IQ test, give scores, wait for them a couple days to interact, and go back, tell them that the scores are actually supposed to be reversed, and wait and watch. And it worked. And to add to it, he did an extra credit one and gave Frank and Marie the test. And he started off by making Frank the smarter one, and Frank loads it over Marie in a way that you know he would. And that is walking in with a shirt that says, "I'm with stupid," pointing at Marie. That is such a Frank move. I really wish I could have seen the aftermath, though, when he's given the actual scores, which, just like with Ray and Debra, I have a feeling that Marie is smarter than Frank. But whether or not it's to the same degree, it's up in the air. But it also could just seem that Frank seems like he's not as smart as Marie because of his pig-headedness. It's one of those weird things where a character trait could probably outshine the rest of the character's attributes. Some might say it seems a little bit mean of Robert to do this to Ray and Debra. But like he says, it's for his class, and it's to see how a suspect would interact if you mess with their mind. And I have a feeling they were annoyed for a little bit afterwards, but they forgave him because Debra was the one that agreed to do it, and like she said, it was for his class, so she probably was stewing for a little bit and like, oh, well, he got what he needed, and we know it's for his class, and then he makes lieutenant, and even if he doesn't, it's going to be good for him to use out on the streets. And it does make for excellent humor. It's not really brought up again at all in the show, which many standalone episode plots are not really brought up that much. The few would be like Halloween Candy, the episodes involving Robert's breakups, the ones involving the flashbacks, usually when appropriate. But other than that, a lot of these standalone episode plots not really brought up. And this is no different. But they're not necessarily a bad thing, especially later on when Robert is a little less mean, like I've said. a little less in your face about his jealousy of Ray. And that's really all I have to say about Standard Deviation. A pretty good episode, one of my favorite of the first season. If you haven't seen Everybody Loves Raymond and you're looking to watch one episode from the first season to try to get into it, first of all, I'd say start with a pilot because then you get the entire setup right away. But if you want to watch one random episode out of context, I would say Standard Deviation's a good one, especially since it sets up the dynamic between Debra and Ray.